Welcome to our inaugural Community Healthy Aging Summit. This really is about our own personal health, our collective health, and even planetary health. And how we can incorporate neuroscience, lifestyle medicine, and our personal and collective care to promote health span. And we want our health span and our lifespan and our brain span to be the same so that we can all age well.
Okay, well, thank you, Dr. Isenberg, and I want to thank all of you for attending. It's an honor to be here. I'm 77 years old, and my mind and body are changing in predictable ways for this stage of human life. And for me, this is a time of letting go, and not just of material things, but it's also a time to question my assumptions and expectations. It's a time that I'm asking, how many ways are there of knowing? And I'm finding that in old age, when I no longer need to build a career or prove myself in the larger world, I have an immense freedom to work without external restraints or expectations, and to embrace new and unknown territory. And so today I'm going to talk about my ongoing collaboration with poets over the past 15 years, in particular the work I've done with poet Elizabeth Frost. It's been an immensely engaging and challenging process. Collaboration is really interesting because it implies cooperation and compromise, and those are qualities that were not taught or nurtured in our respective professional backgrounds, because in our fields, solo work has always been the norm. Anyway, I was fortunate to be afforded the collaborative opportunity when I was 62 years old, and at the time I had no idea if it would work or where it would eventually lead. The year was 2007 when I was 62 years old, and it was a very significant time of transition for me. I had just had a mid-career retrospective, my first book had been published, and I retired from teaching at Pacific Northwest College of Art. And I moved my home and my studio to a small, tiny outer island in the San Juan Islands. And I was invited to participate in a project titled Collaborative Vision, the Poetic Dialogue Project. So my professional life, as I had known it for more than 2 decades, was radically changing. I was, in entering old age, literally and figuratively moving into new territory in both my life and in my work. For the Poetic Dialogue Project, 30 visual artists and 30 poets from around the country were paired to make new work that incorporated image and text into a single piece. And the direction my work has taken is the result of a fortuitous pairing with poet Elizabeth Frost from Fordham University in New York City. Prior to this, I had had only one experience with cross-disciplinary collaboration. I worked with Montreal Dance Company at Western Washington University, making the detritus you see here for the set. Beth, the poet, had had none, and we didn't know one another's work. We had never met. We had no idea if our collaboration would work out, and the questions facing us were both formal and procedural. Neither one of us knew the process or where it would take us. Our training had strongly instilled in us the idea that in order to make something, you need to know something about medium, about history, methodology. Neither of us had any interest in taking up another art form, but we were interested in crossing the media boundaries with someone to break the solitude of our writing and image-making processes. Beth lives on Manhattan, And although we're both islanders, our homes couldn't be more different. We had never met, but we agreed that in order to collaborate, we needed to be together, exchanging ideas, beginning a process of trial and error. We agreed that Beth would come out to my studio for a week, figuring that I would need my studio equipment and supplies, while a poet's work is portable. A friend of hers looked up the population of Obstruction Island and found 12 residents, and actually that's an overestimate by 400%. And noting that she and I had never met, asked if she was crazy going out there with no way off the island. "Haven't you seen Psycho?" he asked. And that was 15 years ago. Beth and I are lucky because we benefit from the knowledge each of us has about our separate arts. We teach one another and our interests overlap. When Beth arrived at my studio, we had just the length of the summer to start and finish this work. It was a jolt to her working process, which she told me often involved years to finish a single poem. I never felt I had that kind of leisure. In my professional life, I was responsible for a solo exhibition of new work approximately every 18 months. At any rate, we started by discussing what we shared. Beth has an interest in the use of specialized diction in poetry, my interest in collection and scientific preservation, and both of our interests in serial form. We began by looking at images that I had put aside, things that I had thought had possibility, but that I'd never developed into finished work. This is a photograph of a spider web, abstracted in Photoshop to resemble a line drawing. We thought it might be the basis for playing with a number of ideas, but we were really scratching around at this point. Biological collections for scientific study have been the subject of my work for many years, and many of the visual devices that Beth and I have used in our projects are derived from the conventions of specimen preservation and identification that are employed by scientists. The pictures are photographs I made of cat bones collected for study in comparative anatomy of courses in the 1930s, and also a preserved fetal specimen of a horse in a college biology lab. I photographed the marine algae collection at the UW Friday Harbor Labs in 2003 during a residency at the Whiteley Center. In the two unaltered photos on the left, you can see a collection. Let's see, I guess I could use this thing. Yeah, there. Right here in the corner, a collection, a session stamp, which is in that lower left corner, and then also inked and penciled notes, labels and tape, and these are all devices that we put to use in our project. And I had made the 64-inch tall diptych on the right by photographing both sides of a specimen sheet of preserved seaweed. The seaweed sample had been folded over the top of the sheet and onto the back. So this piece was a basis for deciding to present our work as diptychs to represent both sides of a sheet of paper used to preserve biological specimens, with stains and other marks showing through from one side to the other. We decided for the collaborative vision project to create fictional specimen pages for spider webs by adopting the visual vocabulary of collection and preservation. The primary imagery for the work was derived from these 4 photographs of spider webs that I had made on the island. And we structured the project around the life cycle of a spider and its web. We developed a series of 5 diptychs that we titled Arachne. We talked about how text and image could function together as scientific identification and description, figuratively, and as signs and symbols. We worked together in my studio for a week during June 2008. Beth researched articles about spiders and their webs online and looked for found language to incorporate into the poetry, while I created imagery out of lines derived from the photos of spider webs. I added conventions of collection and preservation, like labels and accession stamps, to develop the fictional specimen page. Each diptych in the series began with a photograph of both sides of a sheet of paper. The first top piece addresses how spiders locate their, or actually this first piece, this first diptych, how spiders locate their webs. And the text relies on found language entirely that introduces the image I'm depicting of something called ballooning. That is how baby spiderlings spread into new habitat, each by launching itself on a single strand of silk. From a tall weed, abdomen pointing up, spiderlings tilt their spinnerets. Despite no wings, await the rising thermals, released the silk lines lengthen. Let the platform go, carried by upward drafts, float out like kites in the interest of dispersal, transported. After the week together in June, we continued to work by email through the summer. We passed back and forth more than 250 emails. Beth would send me drafts of the poems and I would send her image files. We wanted to give the text and the image an equal coexistence in the pieces. And we wanted the words in the web to function as traces, as a record of our presence, as line and glyph, as the bodily trace of the spider, and as a feminine trope for the creative and destructive principles of production and reproduction, nourishment and mortality. Arachne number 3 here is about the web as a trap for prey. On the top panel, I depict an imaginary sucking stomach. The sucking stomach allows the spider to ingest and consume what is caught in the web. The poem Beth wrote assumes the voice of the spider, whose method of capturing prey doesn't require motion of any kind. There's no need for chase. The red text that's singled out in the bottom panels of the diptychs is also reproduced in the top panels as a separate poem. And here that red text reads, signal line, capture thread, commissary, sucking stomach. The fifth and final piece in the series is about transformation, and it represents the myth of Arachne. After a number of unsuccessful attempts, I began the piece again by re-separating out the web from one of my photos, and the form of a female torso began to emerge. On the lower right, you can see it appearing from below the breast to mid-thigh. So in Arachne 5, we depict the myth of Arachne, which is about an extraordinary weaver who wished to outshine the gods, and this displeased Athena. And Arachne was punished for her arrogance by being turned into a spider and forced to weave forever. So with reference to the myth, the image shows a woman giving birth to a spider, and the web becomes not only the torso, but the umbilical cord, as well as the noose. And here the red text reads, as usual, boasting infidelities, species preserve punishment. After Arachne, we both were excited to start another series, but it proved challenging. We spent a lot of time searching for subject matter that felt compelling to both of us. We knew we wanted to continue to work together, but we had no idea what we might do. The series we eventually completed is titled The Lore Which Nature Brings. The title comes from a line by Wordsworth in the poem, The Tables Turned. In this project, we contrast scientific and poetic ways of engaging bird nests. That is, specimen collection, which engages the nests as objects, and the subjective, sometimes sentimental, meditations and emotional projections that characterize a lot of poetry about birds and their nests. So we ask, how do science and poetry represent oppositional ways of engaging these phenomena? And might we bridge or at least comment on these representational modes in our own work? So again, I made fictional specimen pages. Beth mined famous romantic poems for a background text. And so here the collected nests are interacting with an overdetermined poetic subject. In Beth's poem for the frontispiece, the first piece, she used only the titles and some of the found text included in the images that follow in order to tell the story of what the series is about. This was the business of her life. On one hand, safety, to fly, flee, rove, rest, and on the other, fixed abode, to couple, lay, hatch, clutch after clutch, glean from courtship's flurry the next and next, the nest's sole function being to brood, and brooding breed, and breeding flourish. Every survival the result of sad experience, the cracked, the lost, the faltered, the flown, the captured, the broken, the dead, while each watching moment might or might not yield its scarce yield till things fall apart. Beth and I have worked together now for 15 years. We did this piece as a tribute to her mother who died in 2008. It was our first foray into the subject of death and grief, although looking back now, we realize that we were always making work about women, mothers, and mortality. Beth wrote the text to suggest a tension between matter and spirit, movement and stillness, in the most minimal way possible. Light as air in hand, pulse still. In 2014, Beth and I shared a 4-week residency at Willapa Artist in Residence in Oysterville, Washington. Beth is on the bench in blue jeans in the picture in the upper left. And the particular gift of this time together was the location. We wanted to move forward with new work to be based on Beth's poem titled Gone. The poem explores the charged and disorienting experience of grief, but neither of us had any idea exactly how to do it. What we found was that much of the landscape and terrain was itself generative, with the bay on one side, open ocean with an extraordinarily long beach, flat beach on the other. And for me, after years of doing studio work, it was a change and a great deal of fun to wander around in a new landscape, snapping pictures. My hope for the residency was that I would find subject matter that could form the basis for discrete sections of the project based on the poem Gone. These and other snapshots did, in fact, provide material from which we developed 2 projects. The first is titled House of Stone. Stylistically, the pictures are oversized black and white postcards. Each is only 5 3/4 inches high by 9 inches wide. You're nowhere now, all colors dulled. Grief settles in. Ocean behind, ridge ahead, ocean behind. You give up prediction, let the policy lapse. No proposal for next. At the edge of a continent, in search of permanence, adrift at the rim, Deception Pass, Useless Bay, Desolation Sound. Always in your head, point no point. A line can't contain you. A sound louder than the surf echoes over the bluff. A bark from the other side, bluffing. Wanting to haunt, be haunted. There is no location, no method. No rituals available, silly to make one up. Like baying at the moon. Who does that? You need to find a plot, your earthly allocation. Each twig, branch, stone, yours. In the neighborhood of wishful thinking, to build a house of stone, never empty again. Stone, solid, stone the sum of it. A unique feature in the peninsula landscape of Willapa Bay are the enormous mounds of oyster shell built up from decades of harvesting. Oystering the bay dates back to the 19th century, and photographs I made of the mounds became the basis for a composite piece that we titled "What is Left?" What is Left is 72 inches high, and it moves between the abstract and the concrete in both image and text. Abstracted into pure line, these mounds of mortal remains become desiccated, lifeless landscapes that bear down on the text that I excerpted from the poem Gone. Starting at the top. She wakes and she cannot move. She remembers a lap of waves, a cloud layer, gray weight. She remembers gray water, a bucket, end of an open nozzle. She remembers an apartment window, a car window, a hospital window. She remembers wondering what is here and what is there. She remembers costs, adhesions, increments of a lung occluding. She remembers looking straight up. We have a third project based on Gone with captioning taken from the poem underway. The imagery, both visual and verbal, contrasts a modern clinical experience of institutionalized dying in a hospital, for example, with the iconography of a more metaphysical meditation. It places in relation two people, the dying and the bereaved. And you'll notice that I've reused some of the lines that I had used in What Is Left. Divested until of what? She misses she. Clutch, clutch, clutch. She clutches at nothing. Nothing clutches back. Whatever she reaches for vanishes. Whatever she reaches for sticks. What? She reaches. The bed's gray frame, tilting, tilted. Here, she says. Where? Here, she says. Table surface is cup of ice, cotton, cold. She remembers a gray splotch on a white ceiling. She wakes, but she cannot move. A weight bears down. Wants to haunt, be haunted. There is no location, no method. She is not herself. She left and leaves she. She asks how long she will be gone. I don't think we're finished with this series. It's kind of been ongoing for a number of years. I've adopted Beth's way of working on a much larger time frame. There are too many gaps in the narrative, and I think we need to represent more of the poem with more images and revise some of these captions. In other words, it needs to be fleshed out. The beginning of this project, titled Remains, were apocalyptic prose poems that Elizabeth Frost had in her archive and photographs of bones that I was making at the time. There are 16 pieces in the series, and I'm going to show just 2 of them. In this one, I made the image for the existing text, and in the next, Beth wrote text for an existing image. This reads, "It sat in the far corner of the window of an antique shop in the Marais. The owner tried to sell it to me every time I passed. One ear was missing. The fur was rubbed through, revealing a canvas-colored hide. Its stiff tail had cracked an inch from the anus. It was bandaged with transparent tape. 'Et alors,' said the owner, 'you do not understand. This cat, he is the cat of Edith Piaf.' Each time I waved at the man, and the cat too. And each time I shook my head, singing out, 'Je regrette,' as I quickened my human steps." Many years ago, a student had gifted me a box of skate eggs that had washed up on a Florida beach. They're often referred to as mermaid purses. This reads, "Accessory of a siren, horny case, skate egg pouch. What might come out of a mermaid's purse? Cell phone and lipstick? Lover's kinky scat? or a living ray. If washed up at the strand line, only crisp brown remains. Flat round clutch, arabesque for a strap. One-time incipients, wannabe juvenile, oh baby, baby. We call this series of 19 images Object Project, and 2 poets were involved in this collaboration, Elizabeth Frost and Catherine Hazard. They came west in 2018 for a 2-week residency at the Whiteley Center at the Friday Harbor Labs. Catherine was fascinated by the objects in the collections of the historical museums of San Juan and Orcas Island and wanted to do a collaborative project with us based on these objects. I've always worked with organic materials, so working with man-made material was not a natural for me, nor was it for Beth, but we thought, well, why not give it a try? And initially I incorporated text into the images in various ways, but I eventually ended up shaping text, in this case, Catherine's, to create an adjacent visual relationship with the object, a millstone, rather than incorporating the text into the image. I had photographed a wooden box holding 3 rows of glass vials containing 19th century pharmaceuticals, and I erased everything except for the paper labels. And Beth Poems reads, "Something's missing where their bottles were, phosphorus, belladonna, bryonia, coculus. Tongues float commas, suspended little elves in the air, words as poison or cure. Pharmacons promise, we don't want to kill you, though we might, to fix us for life." Beth found this text in a Wikipedia entry for muslin and erased the words to create the poem. And Catherine wrote a long poem for this object in which the shape text that you see here was just a small part. And Beth and I were surprised to find out later that her feelings had been hurt when I suggested dropping all of the text except for this fragment, and Beth agreed. But in time, Catherine came to not only appreciate, but applaud that decision. Sweet O, comfort strangely named. The dough is easy, but the nut is hard to crack. Perhaps a filling or a shorthand for its knotty shape. And in case you're wondering, the object is a donut mold, and the poem is by Beth. The questions behind Rose Was All There Was concern visual perception and knowledge, especially the evidentiary knowledge the scientific method produces. What do we see when we look, when we stare? As we stare, how do we know what it is we're really seeing? Old-fashioned specimen slides with their labels and often handwritten texts provided a visual and linguistic template for this series where the subject is vision itself. I photographed microscope slides of jellyfish embryos in the Friday Harbor Labs collection, some dating as far back as the 1950s. Beth and I were taken up with the beautiful effects of time and color on these slides, the aging and cracked glass, the apparent decay of the medium used to preserve the specimens, and the accidents of line and color that result. We ask how, when we experience something as fundamental as light, as transformative as color, as fragile as glass. So the poetic text in these pieces flows in unending loops around the edges of the glass slides, graphically rather like jellyfish tendrils. I stared until everything rose, until everything real was rose, until rose was all there was in a yellow field. I stared until everything rose, and so on. I stared into a bone's marrow, its hollow, as a mind absents itself from all matter of a big surround. Until my eye adjusted, I stared into a bone's marrow. I stared at the meeting of 2 circles in a circle, uncertain what I saw. I stared until the emptied mandorla bled rose, its focal points conjoined. I stared into a speculative eye. I stared at the meeting of 2 circles in a circle. I stared to discern left from right, top from bottom, my cardinal points askew, not knowing what I knew, until figure and ground traded places. I stared to discern left from right. I stared at a crystal rhizome, its cut glass aureole, until all flesh receded, until I wore the sky's pendant against my skin. I stared at a crystal rhizome. A question facing collaborators is, how do we find a place where we can work when neither of us knows the language? It takes letting go, leaving your comfort zones and knowledge base. To conclude, for the creative spirit in you, I'm going to quote the last stanza of William Stafford's poem, Security. So to you, friend, I confide my secret. To be a discoverer, you hold close whatever you find, and after a while you decide what it is. Then, secure in where you have been, you turn to the open sea and let go. Thank you.